The lights in the Johannesburg studio were warm and low. There was no music, no crowd clapping, just silence and stillness before something big. Oprah Winfrey sat across from a man many in the West still didn't know how to understand. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, wore a simple shirt, no tie, no show. His hands rested quietly on his lap. Backstage, Oprah's team whispered. They were unsure how this would go. She had invited him onto her new international show, Bridges, claiming it would build understanding across continents. But something about tonight felt different. Not soft, not safe. Oprah welcomed him with grace, but there was tension in the air, like two worlds that had never truly sat eye to eye were about to meet, and not everyone would walk away smiling. Across the world, people tuned in. In Ouagadougou, students gathered. Near radio sets. In Ghana, families moved dinner outside to keep listening. In Haiti, a small school teacher rolled a TV into his classroom and said, "Watch this. It might change something." Oprah began gently, asking about Traoré's vision. For Africa, he responded simply, honestly. His voice never rose, but his words felt like iron dipped in calm fire. He spoke of children with no shoes who still walked to school, of mothers raising families in broken homes, but still managing to sing. Oprah smiled, nodded, asked again, "But don't you think Africa focuses too much on pain instead of progress?" Traoré didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead and said, "You don't tell someone to stop bleeding just because the world's tired of watching them bleed." In that moment, you could feel that this wasn't going to be the kind of interview that ended with applause. Oprah leaned forward, not aggressively, but with that familiar tone she had used for decades, the one that disarms and controls the room. She said, "I've spent my whole life creating platforms for black voices. Isn't it fair to say the West is finally listening?" Traoré didn't raise his voice. "The problem," he said, "is not whether they hear us. It's that they still choose which voices they want to hear." The audience shifted in their seats. The room got quieter. Oprah tried again. "But look where we are," she said. "A global stage shared equally." Traoré looked around the studio and then back at her. "Sharing space is not the same as sharing power." She didn't respond right away. Then she asked him about an image. A child standing next to Traoré in a ruined village. "You say you led with dignity, but this child lives in dust." Traoré looked at the floor for a second, then back at her. "That child stands in dust because someone took their land, took their future, and called it development. And now you ask him to smile for the camera." His voice didn't break, but something in the room did. Oprah crossed her legs. "It feels like you're blaming the West for everything." Traoré leaned forward. "I blame the silence. The way our pain gets dressed up as history and our resistance gets called radical." He told stories of mines, of oil deals written in Paris, of mothers who buried sons and were told they should still be grateful. A young woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. A man beside her clapped once, then stopped. There was no rhythm to this moment, no script to follow. Oprah glanced at her notes, then back at him. "Aren't you afraid of losing friends?" Traoré answered simply, "I'm more afraid of losing the truth." Outside the studio, something had already started to move. On Twitter, the clip of Traoré saying sharing space is not the same as sharing power was spreading fast. But inside, the weight was still falling. Oprah put her notes aside and said, "You speak with pain, but also with fire. Don't you think fire burns bridges?" For the first time, Traoré stood up, not to walk away, but to reach into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small photo, weathered, faded at the corners. It was his grandmother, standing outside her old village house. No shoes, a baby in her arm, a garden shovel in her other hand. "She built a life from nothing," he said. "And yet she was never called powerful, never interviewed, never heard. I am only here because she survived everything they didn't teach us in books." Oprah looked at the photo. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The audience was still. Traoré didn't raise his voice. "We speak of peace, but peace built on silence is just a prettier cage." He walked back to his seat, sat down slowly. "You are not the enemy, Oprah. But sometimes those who've been lifted by the system can't see who's still underneath it." Oprah's face changed. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted her cup but didn't drink. "You think I'm blind?" she said. "I think sometimes we all are," Traoré replied, "until someone cries loud enough to wake us." For a moment, it felt like a debate. But then it didn't. It felt like a funeral, a burial of comfort, and a birth of something harder, something raw. The broadcast ended soon after, but the silence in the studio stayed long after the lights cut out. Outside, in Burkina Faso, kids were replaying it on their phones. In Mali, someone wrote on a wall, "He said what we always knew." In Chicago, Oprah's team huddled, unsure what to say. In Paris, African students sat together in coffee shops, whispering, "We are not invisible anymore." The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Some called it disrespect, others called it revolution. But across Africa, across villages, dusty streets, and crowded classrooms, there was no debate. There was only one sentence spoken again and again. "He spoke for us." In Oprah's circle, there were closed-door meetings. No public apology, just quiet statements about continuing conversation. But in the places where healing matters most, the message was already out. Traoré didn't tweet. He didn't celebrate. He visited a school, sat cross-legged with children, and listened to their dreams. He told them, power doesn't come from yelling. It comes from not walking away when the world tries to ignore you. That afternoon, letters began arriving in Burkina Faso. From Brazil, from Nigeria, from Haiti. "You didn't shame Oprah," one said. "You just reminded her she's not the only voice in the room." Later that evening, Traoré sat in his study, the photo of his grandmother by his side. He didn't look tired. He looked full. A candle flickered by the window. Outside, kids danced barefoot in the dirt, singing old songs that had somehow found new meaning. The world hadn't ended, but something in it had shifted. And once again, no one could go back to pretending they hadn't felt it.